All right, fantastic. As people begin to join, I will welcome everyone to the Skye Show. Just kidding, it's PoliticsNY with Steve with a tie.
Hi.
So here we are. You are watching the New York City Comptroller debate. These candidates here are facing off on June 22nd in a Democratic primary election to be the next New York City Comptroller, a seat currently held by Scott Stringer, who's running for mayor. So the Comptroller is our city's accountant. This job is to make sure that city government is using our tax dollars efficiently and ethically. So tonight's debate for New York City Comptroller is one in a series of Schneps Media's PoliticsNY candidate debates sponsored by AARP New York. New Yorkers 50 plus are the city's most reliable voters, accounting for 3 out of 4 ballots cast in the last open mayoral primary. AARP urges all of the Comptroller candidates to remember that 50 plus voters count and to focus on the issues most important to this critical voting bloc. So Schneps Media, the parent company of PoliticsNY, is the only media outlet providing a platform for every single New York City candidate to have their faces seen, voices heard, and personalities on display. I've been doing my 3 questions in 3 minutes interview series, so if you haven't been part of that, you have to be. And we've been conducting, Steve and I together, hundreds of video interviews with all the different candidates, which can be seen on our website, politicsny.com. So this forum is being recorded. You can watch it on our website, politicsny.com, and see all of our recorded debates on politicsny.com/debates. Tonight, for this Comptroller debate, we have 1 hour together. We're going to be keeping time for each question, allowing candidates 60 to 90 seconds to speak, depending on the question. And I like to give my timeout signal because I hate cutting people off. So I'll do that when it's time to stop. Who's talking? Oh, hello there, David Weprin.
Hi, Skye. How are you?
Hi. So I'm just going over the rules and regulations and my introductory remarks. So if someone calls someone else out, that candidate, of course, can respond. I like to keep this light and easy. Steve and I have been moderating dozens of these debates. We've actually moderated a debate for every single contested election in New York City. So this is one of the last ones that we've done. So we try and keep it light and fun because I know how many debates that there are for you candidates. So any jokes or references to pop culture or fashion are always welcome and encouraged. So over the next hour together, we'll do 2 or 3 serious questions that pertain to AARP members, AKA most double prime voters, and we'll do some fun questions as well. So we'll just dive in. I see there's a lot of people participating here. And if any other candidates are stuck in the attendee space, I will of course move you over so you can be a participant on the screen here. But right now we have 4 of our candidates. Let's go through and do an introduction. So candidates can just tell us in 90 seconds about why you're running for Comptroller, what makes you better than the rest of the people on the screen. And maybe if you want to give like your catchphrase, we'll do a little something exciting. So let's begin with Brian Benjamin, please.
First of all, thanks to Schneps Media, PoliticsNY for having this debate. It's a pleasure to be here with my colleagues who I just saw about half an hour ago. And we all sprinted to some destination so we can get this done. I am. My name is Brian Benjamin. I'm a candidate for Comptroller. I'm presently the state senator in Harlem. I represent 300,000 plus residents. And I have a great track record for this role. I was the chair of the Budget and Revenue Committee in the Senate. I am the son of Caribbean immigrants who came to this country with 2 suitcases and a dream, hoping for a better life for their children. Grew up poor and was able to really defeat the odds. A lot of it because I had parents who were able to get good union jobs, and I was able to attend some of the best schools in the country, Brown University and Harvard Business School, and have spent a number of years afterwards doing some important things. Number one, building affordable housing in New York City, helping to provide housing for those who are formerly homeless. Also, I spent a few years doing investment management, where I learned the experience that is required in order to be a comptroller. $250 billion of pension assets. Those assets need to be managed not only for the benefits of people like my parents who are retirees, but also to deal with some of my critical issues in society, helping to deal with homeless housing, helping to deal with affordable housing, helping our small businesses, our local entrepreneurs, our minority minority and women-owned businesses who have been hurt for too long. We need equity and fairness to be part of the process. So I want to make sure that we have diversity. I want to make sure that we have talent, and I'm going to do that as the next New York City Comptroller.
Thank you. Now let's hear from Corey Johnson.
Thank you, Skye. Thank you, Steve. Good to see my friends, Brian, Zach, David, and Kevin. We were just with each other for a couple of hours, so back to back. I'm running for New York City's Comptroller for a simple reason. After a difficult year for our city, I want to help lead our city's comeback and get this recovery done right. I know the promise that New York City offers because I've lived it. I grew up poor in public housing. My mom raised me and we struggled to get by. I started my career fighting for tenants and fighting for civil rights. And during my 4 years as Speaker of the City Council, I've taken on big issues and fought the big fights. I've made our city more affordable with programs like Fair Fares for New Yorkers living in poverty. And just a couple of weeks ago, we expanded housing vouchers for the homeless. When COVID hit, I led the City Council through one of the worst budget crises in our history. And I fought the mayor's proposed cuts to our city's social safety net. But we know that the difficult times are not over yet. And no matter your race, religion, gender, zip code, or bank account, you deserve a city government that works for you. And that's what I'll do as Comptroller, working to rebuild our city better and stronger than before. I think this job is probably the most important job that New Yorkers aren't really focused on right now. A lot of folks are focused on the mayor's race and city council races. But this job is going to be really important for New York City's recovery and New York City's future. And I'm grateful that you all are holding this forum tonight.
Thank you. Zach Iskall.
Skye, great to see you. Steve, great to see you too. It's been a minute. To my fellow candidates for Comptroller, I don't know if we're sick of each other yet. It was great to be with you guys an hour ago. Me here too. At some point in time, we need to mix it up and start giving each other's intro speeches. I think we could do it by now. So my name is Zach Iskall. My family has always served this city. My grandfather worked for the Department of Sanitation. My mom was one of the only public school teachers to stand with her Black colleagues and students during the 1968 teacher strike, which is a very contentious moment in the history of New York City. My public service began 2 decades ago. It started in the Marine Corps. Led troops during some of the heaviest combat of the Iraq War. And I've spent the last 10 years building a number of businesses, a nonprofit called the Headstrong Project that's now one of the leading and largest providers of mental health care in the United States. When I came home from war, I'm very proud. I never left anyone behind in combat or out of combat. When we abandoned our translators, I fought to bring them over here. When I began to lose more of my Marines to suicide than I did in combat, I built the Headstrong Project. And most recently, I served as the deputy director at Javits Medical Center, helping lead 28 federal, state, and city agencies and turning Javits into one of the only successful COVID field hospitals in the country. And I'm incredibly proud of the work that that team has done in vaccinating hundreds of thousands of New Yorkers. It's really remarkable. I'm running because I love New York City more than anything else. I'm a husband and a father. I'm very concerned for the future of New York City. This is a city that's spending almost $100 billion a year. It's more than 48 out of 50 states. It's almost as much as the next 15 or 20 largest US cities combined. And the budget has ballooned by an additional 20 or 30 billion a year. That's almost 2 to 3 times what LA County spends in total every year. And for that amount of money, we could have gotten free public transportation. We could have made city colleges free. We could have gotten universal broadband. We could have ended homelessness. Instead, we've seen an increase in homelessness. We could have made class sizes smaller and addressed the education gap. Instead, classes have gotten larger, as has the education gap. There's so much that could have been done that didn't get done. As Comptroller, I'll make sure we don't leave any New Yorker behind. Skye, sorry for running over.
Listen, I don't want this to be boring. So I know you mentioned you all know each other's introductions. So sorry about that.
So I am State Senator Kevin Parker. If it doesn't make dollars, it doesn't make sense.
That was a good line in the last debate that Kevin had.
So there's Kevin. Kevin, why don't you go next?
Well, I should just let Zach continue because Zach was doing such a good job at being me. He's a better me than me.
I'm not good enough looking, Kevin.
I'm State Senator Kevin Parker. I represent the 21st District in Brooklyn. I'm the Majority Whip in the New York State Senate, as well as the Chairman of the Energy and Telecommunications Committee, and of course, a candidate for City Comptroller. And I'm running for City Comptroller because I'm a real New Yorker. And I really think in this moment, I have the three things that people need in this job: experience, leadership, but most importantly, vision. I have born and raised in Brooklyn in public housing, grew up in the Bushwick Projects in NYCHA, went to public school my entire life, graduated from Midwood High School, but spent almost 30 years working in public service, everything from the state assembly to the city council, worked for the first Governor Cuomo, worked for the state controller's office, worked on Wall Street at Payne Webber before having the opportunity to work on Hillary Clinton's campaign and make her the US Senator from New York. And then had the great pleasure of my life to be able to represent the Senate, represent the 21st District in the Senate for 18 years, where I've served on the Finance Committee, the Insurance Committee, the Banking Committee, and I've been either the ranker or the chairman of the Energy and Telecommunications Committee the entire tenure in the State Senate. And I hope to get a chance to be your city controller and really address the issues that we need to address to have a real equitable recovery. I would develop a economic equity council, kind of be like the World Economic Forum, except for New York City. I would prioritize creating full-time jobs at a living wage with benefits through developing small businesses, because we have an economy that's moved from Wall Street to Main Street. And I would create a collaboration with CUNY to create small business development centers at every single CUNY campus across the city of New York. And then further, I would make sure that we audit the police department and address the needs of our community to really have a police department that serves and protects, but does so with dignity and respect. And lastly, but certainly not least, I wouldn't just invest in Wall Street. I invest in our Main Street, but most importantly, our schools, to reduce class size, add more music, art, athletics, and dance as regular parts of the curriculum, expand school-based athletics. And now that we have universal pre-K, we need to have universal after school. And so if you give me a chance, Kevin Parker, to be your next city controller, I'll not just help work with you to win this election, but we'll build this city back from progress to prosperity. Thanks so much for this opportunity.
Great. Thank you. And David Weprin.
Thank you, Skye. You look marvelous.
Thank you.
Good to see you, Steve.
Nice to you.
I'm running for New York City Controller. These guys can give my introduction. I'm running for New York City Controller to put the needs of working class and middle class families front and center, and to protect the pensions of over 700,000 New York City retirees like my 91-year-old mother, who was a Cuban immigrant to this country. She came here at the age of 8. She didn't speak English. She went to our public schools and she became a teacher. And now she has a teacher's pension that she's relying on. I also want to use my background in finance, both public and private sector finance, to help bring back the city that I love. I'll add to with Zach, I'm also a husband and a father, but I'm also a grandfather and a grandfather of 6. And I'm worried about the future of New York City, and I really want to help New York City come back. And we're anticipating multi-billion-dollar deficits after this year for the next 4 years or so. And I believe I have the relevant background to help New York City come back.
Beautiful. Now, listen, I don't want you guys to think this is boring. So we have some serious questions, but let's go to the fun question first. And let's have you guys go in the same order and tell us your superpower. Let's begin with that. Brian Benjamin.
My superpower, Jesus. All right, Skye, you get right into it. One of the things I'm really good at is I can meet someone and I am very clear quickly on sort of some key things about them. It's just something that, how they look, how they walk, how they move. I can just sense a couple of key things, and typically it always works out, which is really, I don't know how I do it, but it's something that I just kind of have, Skye.
Does it work on Zoom too, or you need to meet them in person?
It's better in person, because in person you get to feel their energy, you get to see them in relation to other people, how they move, how they walk in the room, how they command the room or not. You get to really get all that. But I can go up. Got it. 1, 2, 3. I know who I'm talking to.
Oh, so Brian, what would you say about each one of us?
We'll be here all day. I'm going to reserve that, Corey.
CWABC didn't ask these types of questions.
Apparently not.
Corey Johnson, what's your superpower?
I think my superpower, if you ask my boyfriend, is I am a very, very good dancer. And I know the words to almost every single Diana Ross song because I listen to them in the shower every single morning, which makes him completely crazy. I'm a disco fan. I'm a dancer. I'm a pretty good lip syncer. So, you know, I think those are some of my non-governmental superpowers.
See, this is a great icebreaker question. Zach Iskall, what's your superpower?
Oh God, I have no idea. I mean, you know, it might be guessing the age of kids just because I have 4. It could be, you know, a lot of people have no idea what my wife is doing with me. I married way out of my league. Probably just convincing Meredith Melling to spend her life with me. I think that's a superpower. It's definitely not my dance moves.
Kevin Parker, you still there? What's your superpower?
My superpower is passing legislation. Back in 2000, when we actually had a pandemic, I passed more legislation than anybody else in the state legislature. Over 40 bills passed out of the Senate. 21 went to the governor. 20 became law. And so making law is my superpower.
Way to make a fun question into a serious question.
I do this for a living, Skye.
Also, just so you know, we learned in the last debate, Kevin Parker's superpower is not eating pizza.
No. My superpower is eating pizza without folding it.
If it doesn't make dollars, it doesn't make sense.
I'm not only going to invest in Wall Street, I'm going to invest in Main Street.
The only poll that matters is on election day.
Okay. My real superpower.
You might as well take over. You mind if we just kind of handle this from here on out, Skye?
Corny political puns are my superpower.
David Weprin, what's your superpower?
My superpower is the ability to spoil my 6 grandchildren in many meaningful ways.
How sweet. Oh, here's Brad Lander, just in time for our exciting question. Hello, Councilman. He's connecting to audio.
He thinks it's going to be serious, Skye, and then you're going to hit him with, what's your superpower?
He doesn't know, you guys. He doesn't know what's about to happen. Hi, Brad Lander.
Hello, Skye. So sorry to be late. I was at that WABC radio debate with everybody else, and I got on the F train, and I'm afraid the F train went rogue. So I really apologize for being late tonight.
Well, you were the only one that takes the subway, so.
That's okay. Listen, we did intros, and then my first question was, tell us your superpower. So let's just jump right into your superpower, and then you can tell everyone a little bit about yourself.
Thank you much, Skye. I think my superpower is corny dad jokes. That's at least what my daughter says. It's either that or making city government work better. That's what I've been doing for the last decade, trying to make sure city agencies perform. You know, I'm a progressive. I'm proud to be endorsed by the New York Times, by AOC, Elizabeth Warren, Jumaane Williams, and tonight I just got endorsed by Bernie Sanders. But government can't deliver on its promises if there's no accountability for mismanagement, if we don't keep corruption in check, if we don't tell the truth. And what I've done in the city council for a decade is dig in on agencies, dig in on the budget, and make city government work better.
Okay, beautiful. So that was a little serious and a little fun. So thank you for joining us. Thank you for being here. Now, this debate is sponsored by AARP. So now, after we had our little fun question, let's go into a more serious question and talk about affordability of the city, right? The controller is the city's accountant. AARP members and everyone is concerned that the city won't be affordable for them when it's time to retire. So how will you change that up? And let's give everyone like 60 to 90 seconds, and beginning with you, Brian.
Be clear how you address people over 55's ability to afford to stay here. You know, we're looking at that demographic.
Sure. Thank you for the question. You know, I live in a district in Harlem where I have too many seniors who are living in 6-story walk-ups. And the big problem that they have is there's not enough options, not enough affordable senior housing. I actually, in my background, when I was building affordable housing, helped to build affordable housing for seniors.
Your sound is not good. Sorry to interrupt you.
Oh, my sound is not good?
No.
All right, I gotta work on that. So let me just try to finish the question, and then I'll go from there. So yes, I've actually have experience. Let me start over, Skye, so you can hear me from the beginning.
Yeah.
So first, I represent Harlem, and I represent a district where there are too many of my seniors who are literally living in 6-story walk-ups where they have to make a decision every day. Should they go outside and get groceries? It is so difficult. There's so little senior housing. In my past business background as an affordable housing developer, I've helped to build housing for those who are senior, and it's something that has to be a priority of the next city council and mayor and the comptroller. And one of the things that the comptroller has the power to do is invest in affordable housing. We should be providing more affordable housing for our seniors, more affordable and more affordable home ownership. Because the other problem that we have, Skye, is that there are a number of kids who are going to college, coming back to districts like mine in Harlem, and they have to live with their parents. It's too expensive to get real affordable housing, and we need to provide over 500,000 more units for those who need it. And I have the experience in affordable housing and in investments. I used to actually invest when I worked at Morgan Stanley. So I have the dual experience, not only build affordable housing, also be an investor. I can use those skills to help the comptroller's office to play a very practical and functional role in providing the supply to meet the demand. And if we talk about building more affordable housing, but we don't meet the demand, we're just talking.
Thank you. Corey Johnson, your plan for making the city more affordable. I mean, for people who are going to retire, but for everyone.
Thank you, Skye. As I've said before, I'm running for comptroller to help kickstart the city's economic comeback and to make sure we get our recovery done right. And the role of comptroller is more important than ever. In the last year, we've lost more jobs than any year since World War II. And we need to make sure that regardless of your race, your income, your zip code, your bank account, that you can survive in this city, that you can live in this city. We have an affordability crisis. This crisis has been going on a long time. Before COVID hit, almost 20% of New Yorkers were living below the federal poverty line. And I agree with what Brian just said. There are real levers that the office can use, especially around investments, to invest in truly affordable housing. When we go across New York City and you talk about affordable housing, people say, affordable to who? Because people feel like so much of the affordable housing that's built, they don't qualify for. It's literally a lottery to get into it. The comptroller can leverage by working with the trustees of the 5 pension boards, getting investments into real, true affordable housing that was built with good union jobs. That's one thing I'd look at. And the other thing is we really need to protect and strengthen our social safety net. Our community-based organizations were the ones that were there at the height of the pandemic, feeding New Yorkers, providing supplies to New Yorkers, providing social services, mental health care to New Yorkers. We need to make sure that the city is investing in those social services and that social safety net. That is going to help seniors and it's going to help all New Yorkers, and we need to focus on that. I've done that in the council, and I make sure the comptroller's office does that as well.
Zach, your plan?
Yeah, so it is not affordable to live in New York City by many different measures. When my grandmother took my father home from the hospital, they moved into Knickerbocker houses on the Lower East Side. My grandfather had a job that paid him $7,000 a year, and rent was about $12-15 a month. That was affordable. We should get to a place where nobody is spending more than 20 to 25% of their income on housing, and we can do that. And I think the role the comptroller can play is doing the math. So if that's our goal, how much inventory do we have? How much inventory do we need to create by neighborhood at different income levels? What are the different tools that we have, whether it's different, rezonings, whether it's vouchers, whether it's modifying housing. There's so many different things that we can then implement once we have an understanding what the math problem is to get there. The other part about the affordability of the city isn't just housing. Nothing's affordable. And one of the biggest cost drivers is the city itself. When you dive into, and look, I've been somebody who I've run businesses, I've run a nonprofit. I really understand a P&L and a budget. When you look at the P&L of businesses in the city, so much of their cost drivers is the city. And I'm not just talking about taxes. I'm talking about rent. I'm talking about bureaucracy, right? If you own a restaurant and it takes you 7 months to get a liquor permit, if it takes you, even more time to negotiate with the community board, if you have to deal with 6,000 different regulations to open your restaurant, and that it sometimes takes longer to get permits than it does to actually build it out. Those are all costs that are then passed on to the public, and that becomes sort of the fundamentals that are leading to a $20 hamburger, right, or a $10 beer. How does that happen? The city, through bureaucracy, through tax drivers, and through other drivers, is one of the principal creators of this lack of affordability, not just in housing. And as controller, I think we can do the math on that to identify how we solve those problems and start to make things more affordable in New York.
Thank you. Kevin Parker.
Yes, ma'am. So I agree with Corey that we're in an affordability crisis here in the city of New York. And that affordability crisis actually began before the pandemic, but this pandemic has certainly exacerbated it. One of the problems that New Yorkers have in this moment is that they can't afford much because they literally don't have jobs. And so one of the things that I would do is I would focus on job creation. But the first thing is to make sure that we have an equitable recovery out of this pandemic. I would create a economic equity council, again, made up of business leaders and labor leaders, community leaders, and clergy leaders to map a way forward. I gotta have some of the answers, but certainly not all of the answers. I would create a collaboration between the city controller's office and City College, the City University of New York, to make sure that there are small business development centers at every single community campus in order to get access to, capital, technical assistance, mentorship, and bonding. The reality is that we know that when we put a woman into business, that she hires other women and share in that economic prosperity. We have to put our people back to work, in small businesses will do that. Amazon is not coming to save us, and we have an economy that's moved from Wall Street to Main Street. And I'll really focus on our main streets. But I also think that we have to work on workforce housing. And so we talk about affordability. It's affordable for people who are giving so much to the city. Right now in this city, we have social workers married to transit workers who can't find places to live, teachers married to nurses who can't find places to live. And we really have to do better for our city workforce. And that's the things I would focus on immediately.
Thank you. And David Weprin.
Yes, affordability is a major problem. And our senior about the future of the city, because we have a major public safety problem. And crime is rampant. We're down 3,000.
I think we lost him.
I know he's in and out. Are you there?
You can't hear me?
Now we can.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
We, in order to feel secure, and especially with our senior population, we have to deal with public safety. We're down 3,000 police officers from a year ago. Last time we had a major crime problem in the 90s. We actually had the Safe Streets, Safe City program. We made a major investment in our police. The defund the police movement has caused a major public safety problem, and people have to feel secure. It's affected tourism, it's affected the economy, it's affected the real estate market. I want a safe place. I'm actually a senior myself, and I want to make sure that our seniors feel safe and feel protected. And we want a quality of life for our children and grandchildren. And, I think we have to, in the case of seniors that are relying on a pension, like my 91-year-old mother, I think we have to assure them that we're going to get the best returns on their assets, and that should be the priority. And we can't afford to use the pension funds for political statements. We need them to get the best returns on our assets.
Thank you. And Brad Lander, how would you make the city more affordable for people who are looking to retire or in general?
Thank you so much, Skye. Before I was elected to the city council, for 15 years, I ran 2 nonprofit community development groups that helped bring the city back from the abandonment crisis and turned vacant buildings into vibrant small businesses and into truly affordable housing. Every one of those buildings had seniors in it, and some of them were 100% reserved for seniors. And because they were owned by a nonprofit organization, those seniors knew they would be able to stay affordably at the rents they could afford to pay. Unfortunately, most of what the city does is its so-called affordable housing program with 80% of our subsidies, 75% of our public land, and the vast majority of our tax breaks is give so-called affordable housing subsidies to for-profit private developers. And then, of course, we have to fight them about who the housing is going to be affordable to and whether it's going to stay affordable in perpetuity. So what I want to do is make sure New York City builds the next generation of social housing, of things like Mitchell-Lama, of nonprofit limited equity cooperatives, of community land trusts, of housing like what we built at the Fifth Avenue Committee and through the Pratt Center for Community Development. That'll make sure we have truly affordable housing for seniors, for young people, to help homeless people get off the streets, to create affordable homeownership opportunities that won't be speculative. And you can find that whole plan. I think I'm the only one who's put out a plan for using the Comptroller's office on housing at landerfornyc.com. One last point I want to make, though, is we do also need to help our seniors stay in their homes. During the pandemic, I created a new nonprofit organization called the Neighbor Network, working together with Heights and Hills and Greenwich House and other senior organizations, calling isolated seniors to help them get the resources they needed, to have relationships to combat social isolation, and now to get vaccinated. And it's helped thousands of seniors during the pandemic.
Awesome. Now, a question from my co-moderator, who's a senior himself.
Well, I guess so. A part of the Comptroller's job is dealing with the pension, and the pension's a huge part of the budget and a growing part of the budget, the public sector pension. On one side, there is a movement, a progressive kind of movement, to only invest in certain stocks that do business with certain people, and they politicize how it's invested. And the other side is you want to have a better return for the pensioners. So my question is, how are you going to balance the politically finding the right way to invest while still getting a good bang for the buck for the pensioners, the public sector pensioners? And we could start with Brad, and we'll go reverse order.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Steve. The first thing here is to understand the Comptroller is a fiduciary to the 5 pension funds. And what that means is you have to remember first and foremost whose money it is. It's not the Comptroller's money. It's not the city's money. That money belongs to the teachers and firefighters and nurses and payroll administrators who earned it. And the Comptroller must earn them a risk-adjusted market rate return so their retirement security is there when they need it. That's the bottom line. Now, there are ways to make sure that you do well by doing good. One example is companies do better when they pay women and people of color fairly. So there's a pay equity initiative demanding that companies disclose their EEO-1s. The Comptroller's office has started doing this, but still only about 6% of the top 1,000 companies have done it. So I would work aggressively with other shareholders to make sure that all the companies we invest in disclose their pay data and pay women and people of color fairly. And then finally, you have to look at systemic risk throughout the economy. The $250 billion in those 5 pension funds is invested broadly across the economy. So you can pay attention to individual company risk and to sector level risk, but you must also look at systemic risk like the climate crisis, like racial inequality. That's a part of fulfilling your fiduciary obligation to those pensioners. And I misspoke. The Comptroller is actually only a fiduciary to 4 of the 5 pension funds. The 5th BURS you advise, but you're not technically a fiduciary.
It's just real quick. The fiduciary duty is to get the best return or to politically correct what it's invested in.
Being a fiduciary means you act basically as though, that's you have to remember whose money it is. And yes, you must earn them risk-adjusted market returns. Now, you have to be mindful of risk when you're making investments and making those decisions, but you don't play politics with it. You are a responsible fiduciary investor. But as I say, paying attention to systemic risk and working with other investors to help companies broadly do well across the economy is the role of responsible fiduciary investing. I've got a plan on this on my website at landerfornyc.com that includes a couple of bank CEOs and a person who wrote the book on how to adapt modern portfolio theory for exactly the question you're asking. I hope folks will go read it.
Thank you. Who was the one before you? Was it David? Or?
David, yes, David Weprin.
Yes, in answer to your question, Steve, your primary focus should be getting the best returns on the assets. As you know, if the pensions don't earn a 7% annual return, it's up to the city general budget to make up the difference. And we're anticipating multi-billion-dollar deficits for at least the next 4 years after this year because of Washington aid. We're not expecting a major deficit this year. But as we get those deficits, we're going to have a major problem, and there may be layoffs, there may be significant cutbacks if the city has to add $1 billion on top of multi-billion-dollar deficits. So my first fiduciary obligation would be to try to get the best returns. As a city controller, you are one of 3 citywide elected officials. You can certainly take positions on social issues, on political issues, but as that fiduciary of the pension funds, you should be looking to get the best returns, have a diversified portfolio, and constantly be reevaluating the asset allocation and how your investments are doing and figure out ways to do better.
Thank you. Who is next, Skye?
Yes, Kevin Parker.
So any of my colleagues could have answered for me for this answer. If it doesn't make dollars, it doesn't make sense. And that's the bottom line with the pension fund. The other part of this is you have to work in collaboration with the other trustees to make sure that happens. And I'm committed to being a partner with the other trustees to make sure that we properly deal with the pension fund. I think there's two other major issues. The first one is equity, right? And there's not enough equity going on with the pension fund. Right now, Blacks, Latinos, Asians, and women represent over 60% of the population in the city of New York, yet they are investing less than 5% of the pension funds. We need to change that. We need to work and provide incentives the way other states like Illinois and California does to Black and Latino money managers in their state so they can have preference to manage some of those funds. We also have to work with some of the Black and Latino money managers to get them out of just the small cap and mid cap funds and help them collaborate and to expand into other funds so that we can create more diversity and more inclusion in the pension fund and how we have people managing it, right? And then beyond that, we also need to use the fund to actually create more opportunity for New Yorkers, right? So I would invest in more funds that invested in New York City, small businesses in particular. The other thing I would do is make sure that that we convert to a clean energy economy. I think that Scott Stringer did a good job at working with the pension funds in order to invest from fossil fuels. I think that's a way to go about it, but I would flip that model on its head. Instead of divesting from fossil fuels, I would really focus the pension funds on investing on the New York City clean energy economy, is what I've done on the state level as the chair of the Energy and Telecommunications Committee. And I certainly would bring my expertise and my experience to do that kind of work here on the city as well.
Thank you. And Zach Iskall is next for this pension question.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I challenge the notion about, I don't see that there is really a big difference between getting a financial return and having a social impact. I think actually in some ways we have to be a little bit more careful that sometimes when we are doing things like divesting from fossil fuels, sometimes we're actually hurting our end state of increasing the amount of renewable energy that we're creating, or even reducing the amount of energy that we're using. You see that over the last 7 years, New York City is now actually burning more fossil fuels today than it was 7 years ago. And also a lot of the companies that are at the forefront of developing alternatives and renewables are also fossil fuel companies. There's a wind farm being built off the coast of New York. That's being built by a Norwegian oil and gas company along with BP. National Grid, it's a gas company, also making huge investments in renewables. So we have to be really thoughtful about what it means to divest from a fossil fuel company to make sure that we're not also divesting from renewables. And so I really like the way that Kevin just said that. Senator Parker's right. We need to be investing in clean energy and renewables. But I don't think that there is a real difference there between getting a return and having a social impact. With that said, I do think it is important to note one of the biggest barriers to pension fund performance is less about asset allocation, and it's much more about the actual management of the fund itself. There was a report that came out in 2015, the Funston report identified 240 different recommendations for taking the Bureau of Asset Management and bringing it into the 21st century. Scott Stringer, the current controller, has implemented about 18 of them. But these are things that will reduce our exposure to fees. The city right now spends about $500 million on fees to consultants, funds of funds, enabling us to have a longer term investment horizon. But you're cutting me off, Skye.
Sorry.
That's all right. We'll get back to it.
Yeah, because my next question, so you can prepare in advance, is about what you would do the same or differently than Scott Stringer.
The next question. I want to answer the question. Oh.
Let's go to Corey now for this pension. I know Steve's pension question.
I know Skye doesn't like budgets and pension, but we're talking
It's just
control.
not my forte. That's all. I can barely handle my own budget. So
Listeners want to know. It's controller.
go to Corey. Yes.
Sure. I mean, a pension is a promise, and New Yorkers who spent a lifetime working as a teacher, a firefighter, or a sanitation worker deserve to retire with dignity. And as controller, my North Star would be getting the best returns to protect the retirement security of more than 700,000 New Yorkers in the 5 pension funds. But that isn't mutually exclusive with our values. These days, divesting from things like fossil fuels isn't just the right thing to do. It's actually the fiscally responsible thing to do. And I would give pension fund trustees candid financial and investment advice and work collaboratively to develop an investment strategy that preserves and grows our worker retirement funds over the long term, while looking to cut down on the sky-high fees that we pay to the outside investment managers. Right now, I think we're paying over $800 million in fees to these outside investment managers. And in some of these investments, like an investment recently in ExxonMobil and Chevron, we actually lost money on that investment. It wasn't a good investment. And so that aligns with getting the best return on the investment. That has to be our North Star, but that isn't always incongruous with actually doing things that align with our values.
And
So you don't think we should just put everything in GameStop?
Yeah, right.
I just thought I'd throw that out there. All right, Brian Benjamin, please.
Sure, thank you for the question. I completely agree that our top priority as a comptroller has to be about maximizing returns for the retirees, and that actually is in benefit of the city of New York. But I do think it's important to note that in a number of cases, when you invest with your values, you're actually making the best financial decisions. I'll give you a perfect example. When I joined the Senate, the top bill that I brought to the conversation was requiring that the state comptroller of the state of New York divest from private prisons. And it wasn't a big allocation. It was about $25 to $30 million, but it was an important statement. But the more important point was that when I spoke to Comptroller DiNapoli, he said, given all of the fluctuations in the private prison industry, a lot of the banks, Bank of America, and a number of banks that I've actually helped to lobby, who have decided to stop lending to private prisons, then you had the federal government decide that it would stop renewing contracts with private prisons. So private prisons actually became a financially more risky investment, as in addition to it being a business that we shouldn't be in. Profitizing over mass incarceration is not something that should be happening around the world. And I will say that is the kind of situation where good investment strategy lined up with good values. But we need to make sure we do that. And when we talk about divesting from fossil fuels, I serve on the board of trustees at Brown University, where we've divested from fossil fuels and have had quality returns year over year, topping the Ivy's 10% year over year. So it is possible to do and to maximize returns and to do things that make sense, aligned with our values.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now, as promised, our next question, and it'll probably be our last question before we do our conclusions, just looking at the time, because we do want to end at 7:30. But a lot of times voters like to align themselves with a politician that they know. So this one is Scott Stringer. Now, just speaking about his controller capabilities, what would you do the same or what would you do differently than Scott Stringer as controller? And this time we're going to random order. So let's begin with David Weprin.
Thank you, Skye. One of the things the city charter requires the controller to audit some aspect of every city agency every 4 years. In my opinion, that's not frequent enough. So I would differ from Scott by having a much more aggressive audit schedule to put more resources into the audit bureau. It is actually the largest bureau out of 14 bureaus in the controller's office. But the audit schedule should be much more frequent. I'd like to audit every city agency every year, but I'd also like to tackle the outside contracting budget of the city, which has grown to almost 20% of the overall budget. The Department of Ed is the largest outside contract and budget itself, $8 billion in outside contracts. There's a lot of waste and fraud that could be discovered in the homeless services area. And again, there are a lot of different agencies that deal with homeless, but there was that large contract in the Bronx with the Bronx Parent Housing Network, about a $240 million contract. New York Times did a whole investigation and discovered that there was commingling of for-profit funds and not-for-profit funds. There was corruption by the CEO, Victor Rivera, and he actually was accused of sexually assaulting many women in the shelter. The Times did a very detailed expose on it. That's something that should have been discovered through a routine audit of the controller's office.
Mhm. Okay, thank you. And Corey Johnson, what would you do the same or differently than the current controller?
You know, the controller's most important job is to make sure that government works for everyone, all New Yorkers, again, regardless of their race, income, zip code, gender. They deserve to have a controller that's looking out for their interests. So by that measure, Controller Stringer, I think, has made some progress. His annual Making the Grade report, for example, has shown light on city government's failures to contract to minority and women-owned businesses. But I think that the role of controller is really closely tied to current events in some ways, from Billy Thompson becoming controller after 9/11 to John Liu in the Great Recession. There has never been a crisis quite like COVID-19. So there's really never been a controller dealing with a post-COVID era. And I'm running in this race to be the best possible controller for this time, to make sure that we recover from this public health and economic crisis that we've been facing and to get the recovery done right. That's what my priority will be as controller. I do want to say that I do think David is right. We need to look at these outside contracts more. There are many, many multi-$100 million contracts that go out, and there needs to be greater oversight of those contracts. And the controller's office, of course, looks at city agencies, but we need to look at those outside contracts as well to make sure they're performing for city government. I would make sure the audit bureau hones in more on that.
And Brad Lander, as another member of the council, what would you do the same or differently than the current controller?
The thing I think that Scott has done the best is that divestment from fossil fuels. For reasons we've just talked about, it was a good financial, a good fiduciary decision, but we also face the existential crisis of climate change, and we have to get New York City ready. So I'll make the controller's office a hub for focusing the attention of New Yorkers on the climate crisis. I've laid out an extensive plan to do so. The area where I'd like to make the most improvement is in making audits of city agencies actually win real change and not just be dusty reports that sit on a shelf or a one-day headline in the New York Post. You have to be strategic so that the office wins real change. In their endorsement of me, one of the things the New York Times cited as one of my most effective common sense measures was getting air conditioning in every city classroom. That came from a group of middle schoolers who brought it to us through participatory budgeting. And they said, Councilman, it's too hot to learn in our classroom. So we teamed up with them. And then we quickly realized it wasn't just then. We passed a law that required the city to give us the data. And it turned out there were 12,000 classrooms where it was too hot to learn, about a quarter of the city's classrooms. We teamed up. We built a 5-borough citywide campaign, and we won that commitment to get air conditioning in every classroom. That also proved to be critical when COVID hit because it improved air circulation. I'll bring that model of strategic and effective audits to every single audit that I do. I've laid out that plan at landerfornyc.com/audits. I'll work hard every day to make city agencies work better and win real change.
Thank you.
for those middle school kids and everybody else.
Thank you. Brian Benjamin, what would you
Sure.
do differently? Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for the question. You know, before becoming a senator, I was a partner in a minority-owned business, and I can tell you, coming from communities of color, trying to do business in the city of New York, it's very difficult. Right now in the city of New York, less than 5% of the contracts are going to people of color. It's really a terrible situation. And one of the things that I'll give Comptroller Stringer credit for is the Making a Grade report, which I think which has helped to elucidate some of the issues. And a lot of it has to do with the RFP process and how it works and how it favors the same old companies. The one thing I would do differently is, I think unfortunately, the Comptroller's office has spent way too little time auditing the NYPD and really focusing on reimagining public safety in the city of New York. I represent a district where a lot of times when the police are called, there are mental health crises that are on the table. We need to be talking about, how we are investing some of our key resources in thinking about public safety more broadly, not just law enforcement. And there are a number of great community cure violence groups, violence interrupter organizations that are doing important work. We need to be auditing and evaluating the outcomes. Some people think it's pie in the sky. They're just around, singing songs. There's a lot of important sort of work done in communities, helping to reduce gang violence, helping to reduce the amount of crime that's happening with these cure violence groups. I worked with them last year, during the pandemic, making sure that we're helping people socially distance and doing all these important things in the community. That's the kind of thing we need to do. Auditing the NYPD once every 10 years is not going to cut it. We need to be more aggressive, and we need to think about reimagining public safety in the city of New York.
Thank you. And Zach Iscall.
Thanks, Skye. So it's where to begin. So look, there's some things that Stringer has done really well. He's brought some innovation to the office. In particular, the expansion of responsible contracting. Some of the work he's done with the pension fund and modifying some of the management. But I think, ultimately, I think what we really need to do is we need to get government back in the solutions business. And that is not happening right now. And how do we do that from the Comptroller's office? So one of the things that we have proposed is taking the audit function and bringing it into the 21st century. Right now, we look at auditing a single agency at a time, or a specific part or aspect of a specific agency, and that's it. That's not helping you figure out how to solve a problem. And I think there's a huge role that the Comptroller can play in being a solid partner to the mayor and to the city council in identifying what is and what is not working around the city. And we know most of the problems that New Yorkers are facing are deeply interconnected. You take any issue, homelessness, our education system, the economy, housing, they're deeply, deeply interconnected. Homelessness, we spend $3.2 billion a year on homelessness. There's 16 different agencies that touch homelessness. We have seen an increase in homelessness, not a decrease, even though we have doubled the amount we're spending on homelessness. I think the Comptroller can play a role in auditing how have 55 cities ended veterans homelessness? How have 15 cities around the country, 17 cities around the country ended homelessness? What is working in the city and what's not working in the city? And audit the city's response to homelessness. And that is a multi-agency audit, right? That is looking at how the entire city is working together, also with state and federal agencies to solve that specific problem. And that forces the city to get into the solutions business as opposed to the business of just spending money on problems that never seem to get solved.
Thank you. And Kevin Parker, are you there?
I am always here for you, Skye. So yes, I'm here. So let me just say this. I know the current Comptroller for a lot of time. I think for all of them, I think he's done some very good things, but there are a number of things that I would do very, very differently. Again, my emphasis as City Comptroller would be on equity, right? And so the first thing I would do is something I mentioned already, which is focus on equity with the pension fund and making sure that Blacks, Latinos, Asians, and women have more money under management than they currently do now. I think it's appalling that those groups represent 60% of the population and less than 5% of those who have money under management. We certainly could, and those are the communities, we talk about equitable recovery, those are the same communities that are going to need a hand up. Also related to that, I don't think we've done nearly enough either in the council or the city controller's office around the issue of MWBE and making sure that women minority business enterprises have the same access as white men to contract with the city of New York. Again, when you put a Black woman into business, she's going to hire other Black women. And so in this moment in which we're coming out of a pandemic economy that has threatened both our lives and our livelihoods, the job of the city controller is going to be helping this city to recover. And I'm not really worried about the city per se. It's the greatest city in the world. New York City will recover. The question is, will Flatbush recover? Will Hollis, Queens recover? Will Harlem recover? Will the South Bronx recover? Will the North Shore of Staten Island recover? That's the real challenge for us. And so I'm saying I'm the only one with a demonstrated record of actually doing the work around equity, right? And so we have a broadband affordability program now, $15 a month for low-income communities. I negotiated that, right? We have now a law in which we have the Office of Health Disparities looking at the impact of COVID on African Americans and Latinos. I passed that legislation. We have a utility moratorium. I passed a utility moratorium to make sure that New Yorkers were protected and not have to worry about their water, electricity, telephone, cable, and their internet being disconnected while they're in the midst of a pandemic. And so it's those kind of tangible results that I would focus on. And again, we have to put people back to work. And so I would use my expertise as the chair of the Energy and Telecommunications Committee to really focus on a clean energy economy and how we build those green collar jobs here in the city of New York, put New Yorkers back to work. And that way you rebuild the tax base. And that's how you're going to really solve your out year problems in terms of deficits in the city budget.
Thank you. And I want to take 1 second to thank our live audience. We have a live audience watching and they've submitted a bunch of questions, but look, we only have 2 minutes left. So we will go around and instead of a conclusion, since you guys were unhappy with the introduction because it was too boring for you, let's do a final phrase or word that represents your campaign that you want to leave voters with as that like final impact. And we'll go in a random order again. So let's begin with Corey Johnson.
New York City's best days are ahead of it if we get it done right.
Zach
You
Iskall.
can give your website too.
We say your website. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, Corey for NYC.com. Thank you.
Zach.
You're on mute, Zach.
Thank you. You think I'd have figured that out by now? It's been a year of these Zooms. Accountability and proven results. My website is zach.nyc, zach.nyc. You can also find me on zachiskell.com, and I will throw my my email and my website into the chat.
Thank you. Brad Lander.
Thank you so much, Skye and Steve. The New York Times called me one of the hardest working and most effective public servants in New York City. If you elect me comptroller, I will work doggedly every single day to make city government work better for you. Check me out at landerfornyc.com. Thank you so much for this conversation.
Thank you. Brian Benjamin.
Ready to lead, Skye. Have a background in actually managing money.
You're breaking up. It's hard
No,
to
we
hear.
can't hear you.
You can't hear me? Can you hear me now?
A little better.
Yes, I said ready to lead. I have a background in investment management, a background in helping our community, secure my community board. I have a background in leading the Senate as chair of the Senate Budget and Revenue Committee. I'm ready to lead on day one. And my website is benjamin2021.com.
Thank you. David Weprin.
David for NYC.com. And the keywords are experience, experience, experience. I don't just have 1 or 2 years, some aspect of finance. I have 38 years cumulatively, including 20 years of elective office, overlapping with detailed finance experience, both public and private sector, relevant to the controller's office.
Thank you. And Kevin Parker.
I'm State Senator Kevin Parker. My website is kevinparker2021.com. Again, that's kevinparker2021.com. I'm going to be your next city controller. And if so, I'll make internet access free for everyone, for people like Brian Benjamin in Harlem, who need obviously some help with internet access. And we'll definitely make sure that happens. The phrase I want to leave everybody with is that New Yorkers, remember, you are the people who were here the day before yesterday, and you're going to be the people who are going to be here the day after tomorrow. So let's all of us bring good into the world and let no good be lost. God bless you all.
Beautiful. Now look how we all had made friends, I feel like. Let's take a picture, everyone. Smile. Say Instagram.
Instagram.
Thank you so much to the candidates. Thank you to the live audience. Thank you to
Thank
everyone
you.
for being part
And
of
all
this.
the best to all of you.
Thank
And
you to AARP for sponsoring this. Good luck. Thanks for being part of it on behalf of Schneps Media and Politics NY. Have a good, safe night and see you out there. Good luck.
Wonderful to be with you all. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thanks for keeping it upbeat, Skye.
Bye, guys.
You guys take it easy. Enjoy the rest of your night. See you
Thank
soon.
you.
Bye.
See you tomorrow.
Yeah.